Hello, and welcome to Screams from the Center, where I hope to provide you with information on topics I find interesting and give my perspective on them. On this episode, we talk about the GOP convention and mostly the GOP platform. So, on with the show. We start off with restoring the American dream. The GOP really doesn't know what that means. I often hear conservatives tell me things like two or more jobs and every able-bodied person in a household working said multiple jobs just to break even or fall behind slower, that is the American dream. It's funny how I never recall working like it was 1890 as being the American dream. So that being said, some of the highlights are that the government cannot. It is impossible for the government to create and sustain jobs. But, and this is clear, it can destroy jobs. This seems logically inconsistent to me. I mean, sure, I can go with one or the other, but being incapable of growth but capable of decline seem like polar opposites to me. So they come up with this fair and simple taxes for growth. This is an old argument that there's 20,000 lines or pages of the tax code. I really can't recall which it is, but both of them are false. Firstly, a majority of Americans actually do their taxes on 1040EZ forms, which, as most of you probably already know, is one page. The rest of us, up to the 99.9% of us, can do taxes on either the 1040EZ form or the 1040A form. And the difference between the two is the 1040A form can have multiple pages. And the multiple pages are really based on whether or not you have a more complex type of finances. You know, if you have multiple mutual funds, if you have multiple homes, if you have multiple cars, different things that have valuation that would be needed for tax purposes. And still, that's going to be a very small amount of pages. And everybody can do their taxes, typically from most of these forms, on the back of a sheet of paper or a napkin, if you will. So the myth that the tax code is way too complex is just that, a myth. Now, where it does apply is those few things like corporations and some types of small businesses that probably shouldn't be called a small business. And they need accountants because they're using various tax loopholes which are written into the code to do exactly what people are pissed off about. Now, some corporations aren't as complex and can do them on simpler tax forms. So the idea is that all Americans are burdened by this massive tax code, and that's simply unfounded. I've never done taxes on anything more complex than a few pages on a 1040A form. And I still won't for pretty much my entire life. Now, if you feel that taxes are a penalty, then there's nothing anybody can do for you. If that is your opinion, then any kind of taxation, either a flat rate, fair tax, progressive tax, regressive tax, national sales tax, a VAT tax, which you're not even affected by, none of this stuff is going to be any concern to you because you think that taxes are a burden. Now, most people hate paying taxes. I mean, I do, but I also see this as membership in this club that I like to call the United States. So the GOP is calling for a simple tax code. They want lower rates, and now both of these things are valid concerns, but that means cleaning up and evaluating why a tax break exists, and is that justified based on a system of equality. They also argue for basic or flat or fair taxes. This is invalid. I've gone over this before. We're not talking about dollar values as burden, because they'll pull out things like the upper 10% pays 90% of the taxes. Yeah, they pay the dollar value, but the tax burden. If you have $100 or $100,000 and you buy a $3 bottle of shampoo, the $3 bottle of shampoo is going to affect the person with $100 much more than the person with $100,000. So while the person with $100,000 would pay much more in taxes, if his burden is less than that of the person with $100, then the system's not fair, even though that person who has the $100,000 is paying more in taxes. So then they go to winning trade policy. This means that they're going to talk about getting out of these trade deals. But the problem exists that they're the ones who put it in place in the first place. NAFTA was negotiated partially by the Reagan administration, the second term, partially by the Bush administration, and partially by the Clinton administration. And in fact, a less known fact is that George Bush signed part of NAFTA into law. NAFTA was split up into two chapters. George Bush signed the first. Bill Clinton signed the second. So they're going to try and tell us that using TPP, because Barack Obama, President Obama, is for the TPP, they're going to try and make this argument that because a Democrat's in favor of this, or Democrats may have also been in favor of these trade deals, that's bad. Now, I know a conservative group that calls it Obama trade, which is a good thing because we want people who are we want to get people against these bad trade deals. But the GOP is not going to be the answer that you're going to be looking for. So then they move on to things like responsible home ownership and rental opportunities. This means that they're going to make it more difficult for poorer families who could pay off home loans if the loan was fair to do so. They're going to ignore the fact that they created the law which allowed for predatory lending, which was the key factor in the homeowner collapse of 2007. So they're going to also do something called America on the Move. And this is an empty promise to somehow show that they are interested in infrastructure repair. Bridges, roads, that sort of thing. Yet, there's no talk about how they're going to pay for this. There's no money and no direction to where the funds go. They want to blame earmarks on the fact that they're not funding infrastructure projects. When earmarks are actually... See, when a program is funded, it's given an amount of money. Unless there's a discretion agency that actually prioritizes these funds, Congress gets to appropriate those funds within the framework of what they allocated towards it. This means that a congressman goes, I have a really bad road in my district and I would like this to get fixed. So they earmark portions of that money. Now, there are some congressmen who abuse this system. That's true. The Republicans did do away with earmarks for the most part. Now, funding is really nebulous, and it's hard to figure out what projects need to be worked on and prioritized over others. So, there is no framework within their platform which shows how they're going to allocate these funds or prioritize projects. Are they just going to keep writing checks no matter what to get every project done? No, they're going to obviously want priorities. Now, one could also argue that Republicans have not been funding infrastructure at all even, so there's no indication that they're going to do that if they're in power. They also they also allude to tech jobs, promoting tech sector jobs. Again, the idea of implying that there's going to be internet backbone refurbishment by the government, but nothing on how they're going to fund this. Which brings us to some other inevitables. Building the future, America's electric grid. Now, they're not talking about decentralizing the grid by using local energy sources and whatnot. What they're doing is they're talking about taking large targets that could be under terrorist threat and just beefing up security. This is what they talk about for expanding the grid. Now, they're also going to go into an energy portion a little bit later on in the platform where they're going to advocate expanding coal and natural gas and oil. This does not decentralize our electric grid. This does not decentralize any of our energy grid, nor does it protect us from terrorist attack. There are still 3 locations on the United States that could potentially come under attack and wipe out large sections of the grid. And the Republican plan is covering none of that. The most cogent thing that they have in the platform for this is speeding up the building of new power lines. Basically, that means they're going to do less environmental impacts, less environmental studies, things like that. They're just going to build wherever a company tells them they need to build. And that's it. So now, we'll mention a few quick things, like they want to reduce the workforce in government. The government of the United States accounts for about 20% of the GDP. Now, if you significantly cut into that by, say, I've heard numbers as high as 50%, reducing the federal workforce by 50%. That's going to create not only a huge unemployment mess, but it's also going to create a huge economic mess. We're going to lose GDP. And quite frankly, they have nothing. It's all hope and praying that the private sector creates jobs that compensate for what the government breaks up. Now, keep in mind, Republicans are telling you that the jobs they're cutting are bureaucrat jobs. So there's no reason to indicate that the private sector will compensate for these bureaucracy jobs, these bureaucratic jobs. So where are these people going to work? So now they're also going to claim that reducing the federal debt, balancing the budget, will have some sort of impact on your life or anybody else's life. There's absolutely no evidence to support this. And I could do an entire episode just on the Republican view of the debt, deficit, and budget. And the problem is this has, what the effect of this is the programs that may need extra funding on a temporary basis won't get that funding. So certain types of emergency services will go unfunded and unable to deal with disasters. And wars cost money. I know that Republicans don't like that, but they do. So now we move on to judges. And this is a big one because justice system has come under fire by both sides. So the GOP promises to impeach any judge that they don't like. And they claim it's to promote constitutional integrity. Now, they will appoint judges that will enforce anything that the party, the GOP party, deems correct. This is including existing protections on civil rights, abortion, gay marriage, and establishing Christianity as the religion of the United States. Plus, of course, we can't leave out the made-up right that the Supreme Court gave us in 2007, the individual right to bear arms. They want to create a framework that declares a fetus a full human being. However, you're not going to be legally required to name it or get a birth certificate or social security card, or you're not going to be able to claim the child on your taxes until it's actually born. Basically, they want to declare a clump of cells as a person for just to make sure that you can't get an abortion. Because nothing else they really care about or address in the platform. And now you can look up this platform. Just Google 2016 Republican platform or Republican platform 2016. You can look at the draft. It's posted as a PDF. This is where I'm sourcing this stuff. Now on to some crime stuff. They want more voter IDs, possibly even a federalized system, which, small government conservatives, that's kind of hilarious. And they're declaring a new era of energy by committing nearly fully to energy sources that are over 100 years old, i.e., fossil fuels. These are the fuels that are damaging our ecosystem, environment, and planet the way that we know and live on it now. They care about the environment only if a company can either make a buck off of it or it doesn't really cost anything. It's not based on need or impact, it's based on financial cost. They want to destroy the EPA, not completely get rid of it. They want a shell of an organization called the EPA because rather than thinking about the big picture, they want to find out who can make money. And that's kind of a theme to a lot of these points in there, is that if it's something that the government does or that they perceive the government prevents, then they want to eliminate it so someone can make money. The primary concern of the Republican platform is to make money. So now we move on to what they call preserving Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. This essentially is done by cutting them, turning them into coupon programs, or giving the trust fund over to private companies, forcing millions of people to find private insurance and privately funded retirement at an age when it was impossible to do before Medicare. Because we have wars to pay for, yo. Immigration. Now, they're pretending to be for legal immigration. However, they do this by reducing entry by some brown people and force marching millions of people hundreds of miles. The idea that Donald Trump's going to deport all or part of the 11 million supposed illegal immigrants in the United States is akin to The Trail of Tears by Andrew Jackson. You can't march, even if you only round up 10%, that's still 1.1 million. The kind of manpower it would take to round up even 1 million people and march them back across the border is monumentally expensive and dangerous. So they next want to cut the legs out from the IRS. Now, the IRS is basically the cops for taxation. They ensure that people who are cheating on their taxes are prevented from cheating on their taxes or punished. But the GOP wants to gut the IRS. Some want to eliminate it completely, thus making sure tax cheating is easy. They want to create term limits for public office, thus ensuring only people who can afford to leave their careers for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 years. I don't know what, they don't specify term limits, but I've heard the number 12 years, which is 2 Senate terms and 6 House terms. So basically they want to make it so that the only people who can run for office are people who could take a 12-year vacation from their jobs. How many of you average American people like me, like you, could actually take a 12-year sabbatical from work and then go ahead and find a job? So this means that really only rich people can run. Other highlights that they want to do is they want to make student loans harder to get because they want people who can afford to pay the student loans to get them rather than trying to figure out a way to reduce cost. And they also want the system to be run by private companies who are going to have higher interest rates simply because they need to make a buck. Remember that? Yes, they want to make a dollar. They want to increase penalties to people who are late, restrict deferments and forbearances, and oh yes, they want to also get rid of Obamacare, and they want to put you back in the mercy of the private healthcare system, because again, that all worked really well. They also want to make scientific funding and research if it's politically acceptable. So basically, they want to fund programs that are going to, or fund research that's favorable to the GOP. Like, you're not going to see the CDC doing anything about gun safety again, about the health concerns of gun safety. You're also not going to see science really trying to find out the origins of the universe or anything having to do with stem cells. All of these things are deemed antithetical and anathema to the GOP, and they don't want to fund it. They also want to ease rules on the FDA for approving foodstuffs and drugs because, again, you need to make profits. So they're going to make drugs easier to be approved by the FDA because that prohibits profits and profits above safety and security. They want to privatize more prisons because someone has to make a buck off of jailing someone. And they want to recriminalize drugs that have been decriminalized. So basically, if you live in Colorado, Washington, D.C., or Washington State, goodbye marijuana. Because the federal government under the GOP knows better than the states. Those states' rights people, that party of states' rights. Now, of course, they want to make massive cuts around the budget so that they can spend more on the military. That way they can get rid of the Iran deal and go to war with Iran. They can bluster about North Korea, though they may be a little more cautious now that North Korea has nuclear weapons. They're in favor of privatizing the VA, maybe slowly at first allowing some vets to go to private hospitals for treatments, but eventually they want to defund the VA and create another voucher system. They want to be more aggressive in cyber war and real war. So that's kind of a rundown of it. There's a lot more specifics. I recommend you go and read the multiple pages of it to get details. And if you see anything that I kind of got wrong, you can let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I think that I've pretty much summarized most of what we're talking about. I didn't mention a lot about the whole Christianity thing. I did say that they want to kind of establish Christianity. There's a lot of provisions littered throughout it about the idea of preserving religious freedom. So, go and enjoy. Anyhow, thank you for joining me in this episode of Screams from the Center. Please leave your comments below on how I can improve. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. My blog is at screamsfromthecenter.wordpress.com, on Twitter at screamsftcenter, and on Facebook, Screams from the Center. You can also catch me almost every week on Blab, usually Wednesday nights, and that is at D. Lamont. So, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day.